Welcome to Trench Run. This is Mary Beth Ellis for Fansided. Somehow, Din Djarin kicking super battle droids forces me to love him even more. He's not happy. His face under that helmet is a darksaber all its own. I am telling you, this man is hurting. If you told an 11-year-old me that a Star Wars protagonist would act a sophisticated gentleman around Ugnaughts, but revenge kickline a series of droids, I'd have wondered long and hard about what these crafty Star Wars role players were up to. I had the misfortune of becoming a Star Wars fan in that rare and fallow time when absolutely no one was talking about Star Wars. The trilogy was a decade old, and the very concept of authorized novels was not even dreamed about. So no matter what you think about the prequel trilogy or the sequels, you do not want to live in such a world. But where's all this aggression and Leroy Jenkinsing on the droids coming from? Despite living with a group of people who can't see any way out of living directly below a pterodactyl and directly next to a dinosaur alligator, Mando is not this stupid. I'm hearing from my fellow YouTubers that this behavior is not like Din, or at least the Din this show has presented for 3.5 seasons. What happened to all the love for all the droids? He never had it to begin with. One of the first things this man does in the entire series is refuse a droid-driven transport. This is a profoundly embedded business for him. Battle droids murdered his parents and nearly killed him along with them. Imagine cowering in a cellar as a small child, completely on your own, with no idea what's happened to your parents and what's about to happen to you. And we know Din saw the battle droid about to obey its programming. He squeezed his eyes shut and tried to make himself as small as possible. And it's easy to see how this little boy could grow up to become a ruthless bounty hunter. These moments are paralleled when Mando blasts the living daylights out of the IG unit who tried to off Baby Yoda. Little Din was rescued by a Mandalorian who destroyed a droid, and grown Din repeats the pattern. A defenseless child, completely alone, now owes his life to a Mandalorian and will be raised in the Creed even though he wasn't born into it. That entire incident in Episode 1 might have operated as a cleansing moment for Din Djarin, and the intervention of IG-11 also turned his trauma on its head. This time, the lives of both him and his son were saved by a droid. But we never got definitive word from Din's helmet that he was now sitting cozy with all things mechanical. The show did a fairly decent job of show don't tell on this, and here's the evidence we have that Din is now down with droids. When he, like everyone and everything else in this franchise, landed on Tatooine in Season 2, he grudgingly allowed those obnoxious pit stop things to get within maintenance action reach of his Razor Crest. In that scene, his words on the entire subject, in total, were, "Might as well let them have at it." And in the Book of Boba Fett, when building a new starfighter, he permitted a gonk droid plus the pit droids again to help, but they pretty much stayed on their side of the garage. Most importantly, Mando was in a hurry. Now that he had new space wheels after the destruction of the Razor Crest, he wanted to go visit Grogu, and this was a matter regarding his son. So Din was going to take all the help he could get, even if it was droid-sourced. The one droid he does interact with is the make and model of one that's deeply coded in Star Wars lore as non-threatening and a trustworthy companion. The droid that helped Din place the panel on his starfighter was a BD unit, the same type that fans spent hours and hours with when playing Jedi Fallen Order. This droid was an integral part of that story. And I mean, look at him. He's adorable and even smaller than Grogu. There's not a lot of reason to fear this guy, so no wonder Mando grants him an almost affectionate thank you. This season, Mando attempted to revive IG-11, but then it reverted to its original programming. This was the realization of one of Din's worst fears. And this droid kicking episode likely was the processing and fallout of that distress. But this droid is the only one in the galaxy that he trusted absolutely. So he was still willing to try to get him in working order, even after it tried to kill him, his son, his friend, and at least one Lionel Richie-style statue of a head. The man is loyal, I'll give him that. So IG-11 wasn't an option, but Din still needed a droid to sniff out potential poisons on Mandalore. And for reasons known only to himself and the Force, he allowed the long-suffering R5 to operate as his wingman. Even though he didn't trust it, it was literally falling apart in front of him, and it wasn't rated for exploring caves. I mean, it got maybe 2 feet into a cave before falling over. The droid itself wanted no part of this. I cannot imagine one single reason for Din Djarin to stick that thing into his ride, other than to give him a seat next to poor Ahmed Best in the way back balcony. But this is Star Wars, a modern beacon of hope, a universe in which we're not supposed to know the odds, so I'll allow the fan service. There is one overlooked aspect of the adventures of R5. While pretty much every single Star Wars protagonist bonded with their droids, Mando wasn't vibing with this one. He had zero patience with anything approaching a wacky personality or endearing quirks. He was going to roll this droid right into the mines to test for dangerous gases and life forms, while entirely ready to let whatever was going to happen to it happen to it. And he wanted R5 to hurry up about it. Din would have no doubt pieced out with Baby Yoda if life got serious. Imagine Luke Skywalker doing this with R2. And then, when R5 vanishes from all instrumentation, the only reason Din bothers to check in on its welfare was because Baby Yoda wailed at him about it. And frankly, he wanted to find out if he would die should he breathe the air that he was sitting in. In all the droids Mando tolerated, what was the constant element? Why was he ready to let these select few anywhere near him? It's because they were unarmed. Pit droid, gonk droid, astromech, none of them were designed for battle. And to the extent that Din could grant them a modicum of trust, he allowed them to exist next to him when they were needed to help him reach a goal. And don't forget that between the events of the construction of the Starfighter and this bizarre carnival casserole that is season 3 of The Mandalorian, since then, Din had seen IG-11 turn on him and his baby, engaged in a deeply destructive battle against droids in the Book of Boba Fett, and his super secret Mandalorian covert was ratted out by the loathsome pile of rust he never wanted and pretty much didn't even need anyway. In addition to all this, Din Djarin obviously still hasn't faced the emotional issues stemming from his disrupted childhood. PTSD impacts the way the brain works. It changes the wiring. In most cases, it is never cured, it is managed. And Mando probably wasn't helping matters much in this department with his pretty much daily grade 4 concussions. That's why he was kicking the B2 super droids. That's why he couldn't wait to kick the B2 super droids. And that's why he was ready to not just play the role of, but be the bad cop in the droid bar. It bears noting that Baby Yoda wasn't with him when all of this violence and all of these threats took place. Mando could be reasonably certain that his boy was safe, and he had backup in the form of Bo-Katan in case the situation at court spun out of control, but Grogu wasn't immediately present. Din Djarin has a PhD in annoyed sighing, but he was still willing to help others when and where he could. However, many of these early actions were transactional or connected to his obedience to the Creed. They manifested more naturally after he formed close ties with Grogu. And when there was no little Jedi, he backslid. Kindness and mercy were present beneath all that Beskar, but when Din is cognizant that his son was watching and learning from his every move, he's like me when I'm wearing a skirt and a chapel veil. Hardcore best behavior. Remember the brutality he exhibited in the slaughterhouse scene in the Book of Boba Fett while Grogu was away with Luke? He was right back to, I can bring you in warm, or I can bring you in cold. Dude sliced his bounty in half when he already had a vibroblade sticking out of his chest. It's telling that Mando injured himself with the Darksaber during this melee. He was a man at war with himself. Although he did some slaughtering of his own in that situation, Mando still acted on the echoes of Grogu's influence. He found ways to act honorably both before and after all the stabbing. He told his bounty's henchmen to bail, then spoke humbly to the workers while leaving them the spoils that he figured was their skimmed salaries anyway. That's not just the creed at work in him, it's also the influence of his child. Have we ever heard Din Djarin come even close to laughing unless he was alone with his son? When Grogu was gone, Mando was emotionally directionless and more prone to give in to rage, into the psychologically desolate life he used to know before he quested his way into Clan Mudhorn. So why not wreak revenge on the droids, the non-living beings he still hadn't forgiven? I would love to hear what you thought about this episode and Din's relationship with droids. Holler back in the comments. Until then, this is Mary Beth Ellis for Fansided. Thanks for reading and listening.